Can I erase it now? Okay, so have you ever done 7th chords in inversion? Have you ever gotten into those? 5-6-5, 5-4-3? Yeah? Okay, then I'll just briefly review that. So for a 7th chord in root position, the figured bass is just a 7. You know, you assume that there's going to be a 3rd and a 5th, and so the only unusual interval would be the 7th. For first inversion, the figured bass is 6-5. That's a 7th chord with the 3rd as the bottom lowest sounding pitch. Okay. The 6 and the 5 do refer to intervals, right? There is a 5th above and a 6th above. And it's just the 3rd that is assumed. You assume there's going to be a 3rd in there. And if you want to even think of it this way, you can. But normally, you know, no other interval is put there besides the 6 and the 5. For second inversion, 4-3. And again, there is a 3rd and a 4th above the lowest sounding pitch. So it does indicate the intervals. The one that's implied is the 6th. And you know, that's partly based on our idea of Western harmony, which is it's based on 3rds and 6ths. So you're going to have a 3rd and a 6th somewhere. The main idea behind the figured bass in 7th chords is it's showing you where the 7th is, or showing you where the inverted 7th is. When you take a 7th and invert it, you get a 2nd, right? So the 6-5 shows you where the 2nd is. The 4-3 shows you where the 2nd is, that 7th, that dissonance is. Because that's the spice of the dominant 7th. And the last one, 4-2. Yeah. And sometimes in some books you'll just actually see the 2. Because again, they're just saying all you need to do is indicate the 2nd. That's the important thing. You would assume that you're going to have these other intervals, but in the textbook, you know, the tonal harmony, they use 4-2, which is fine. I prefer that. So. But just so you know, if you ever see just a 2, it still means a 3rd inversion 7. Okay, so everybody okay with the figured bass? Good. All right. Now, when writing these 7th chords and resolving them, there are 2 main rules. Actually, there's one like first rule and then second rule. But let's say I'm going from 5-7 to 1. Okay. So my bass is going to go like this, this. The first rule is that the first thing is that the 7th must resolve down by step. Okay. So when you're writing any kind of, you know, especially 5-7 to 1, but actually almost any kind of 7 chord, the 7th should resolve down by step. Right? And even, what do they say in the book? Something I kind of like to say. We are naturally suspicious of generalizations, as we should be. But the downward resolution of the 7th as a general principle is extremely important. Okay, so yeah, we don't like generalizations, and yeah, it might happen that the 7th will resolve up. But this principle of resolving the 7th downward is extremely important. Okay? It's a mainstay of part writing. So the 7th, in this case the F, needs to resolve down by step to the 3rd of the next chord. Okay? In this case, the tonic. That's the first rule. Now the second rule is that we want the leading tone to resolve up to tonic, right? That's what I was just talking about with that tritone. The tritone, the F, is going to resolve down to mi. The tritone is going to go up to do. So the tritone, the leading tone is going to go up to do. So we do that. That's our next. And then finally, if we want this to be a regularly voiced root position tonic triad, what else do we need?
G.
G. And so where should I put the G? In the soprano?
Soprano.
Okay. What's the problem?
Oh, hugely.
Yeah.
Well, huge leap, but not just that. Parallel
Yeah,
fifths.
Parallel fifths.
Right? Fifth here, fifth here. Okay, so this is the problem of resolving root position 5, 7 to 1. Is if you follow all the rules of resolving it correctly, you're going to run into problems. There's no way to avoid either parallel fifths or consecutive fifths or something like that. Okay? So we've got different ways of dealing with that, different strategies.
Can we omit the fifth?
Well, that's one of the strategies. Yeah, so one of the strategies, you want to do that one? We'll do omit the fifth first. Okay. Omit fifth in tonic. Okay, so in the one chord, because there's another option for the dominant chord as well. If we omit the fifth in the tonic, then what we're going to do is triple the root. Okay? So if we omit the fifth in the tonic triad, if we have no fifth, then what else are we going to get? Well, we don't want to have 2/3 of 2 roots. That would be kind of weak. What we really want to have is 3 roots. And the idea being that with 3 roots there, remember the overtone series we talked about, and the fifth is there? That with 3 roots there, you're going to hear fifth somehow. You know, so you don't really need it. So one of the options in resolving, and this is just root position 5, 7 to 1, by the way. In inversion, you usually have more choices. But in root position 5, 7 to 1, one of the options is to omit the fifth in the tonic triad. So that's, let's say, our first choice. A lot of times this will happen at a cadence, because a tonic triad with 3 roots and a third is very strong, right? It's very stable. It sounds very tonic-y. So that particular resolution three roots and a third, so it has a very strong resolution. And with tonic and soprano and bass, it's really good. Okay, so that's one. Let me just write this a little differently. It's important. Okay, that's one possibility. Now going back to this one again. Another possibility is to use, is to omit the fifth in the 5/7 chord. As long as we're talking about omitting the fifth. So again, if we're going to get rid of this fifth, the note that we want to double is the root. So that one we would voice this way. Okay, so if we get rid of the fifth up in the soprano there, we double the root, we're going to move the fifth to a root, and then again that gives us breathing room. We can resolve the 7th down by step to the 3rd. We can take the leading tone up to tonic, and we can get the 5th there just by maintaining that same voice. So that is omit fifth in 5/7 chord.
So instead of D, we can double root position.
I'm sorry?
Instead of D, we can double G, right?
Yeah, instead of D, you can double the G. That's the only, you can't double the 7th, and you can't double the leading tone. Obviously, I mean, you can't double either of those because of their tendency, you know. Both of those want to resolve in certain ways, and if you double them, then you're going to have parallel octaves. And then lastly, there's a solution that in the book they call the frustrated leading tone. Okay? And that is, so instead of, I'm gonna put this in here. Instead of resolving the leading tone up to tonic, we resolve the leading tone down a major third to the dominant note. And then we can still resolve the seventh down by step. Now we can have some smoother voice leading in the soprano part, and we get rid of those parallel fifths. See, where what was our fifth, now just resolves an octave, we're good. Fifth is down here. The idea being that it's easy to hear for a singer, let's say, to sing from the leading tone back down to the dominant note. The dominant note is an easy note to find, as opposed to resolving the leading tone with some other weird note in the scale. See? But you can only do this if the leading tone is in an inner voice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you can't do it if the leading tone is in the soprano.
That's what I asked.
Because if it's an exposed voice, then you can hear it very clearly. And actually, they can.
Parallel fifth, I guess.
Sorry?
Bass and tenor part is parallel fifth.
Which one? The last one?
Uh-huh.
The bass and tenor are here on a third, and then they become a fifth.
Okay.
Yeah. They have there's a good example of this in the book, actually. There's a couple things I wanted to play for you. So one thing is that on page 212, they have an example where they have a progression, and the seventh resolves as it should. This is the seventh. Resolves down by step, as it should. So here's the progression again. It's in minor. This is a 4 in first inversion, going to a 1. There's a little suspension there in the 5/7. We get the leading tone, but there's a seventh resolving down by step. Okay, now listen to how it sounds when I resolve the seventh up. So I don't resolve it down by step as it should be. Same progression. It just sounds kind of weird. To have it resolve that way rather than to have it resolve down by step. Okay. Then the other thing is about this frustrated leading tone. So at the bottom of that same page, they have an example where they have a chord progression. Resolve it up to tonic. Sorry. See that weird leap in the soprano? It sounds kind of weird, I suppose. In an inner voice, you can hide that, but in soprano, it's kind of weird. So you want to avoid using this frustrated leading tone if it's in the soprano. Okay, so those are the possible solutions for resolving root position 5/7 to 1. Okay. There's 3 different ways of doing that. And you're probably going to encounter something like this near a cadence. So you're coming to a final cadence, and you're going to write a dominant 7 to a 1 chord. That's where you're going to encounter, because you're going to want root position to get your perfect authentic cadence, let's say, or your authentic cadence. And so you're going to find that you run into one of these problems, and you can very easily get around it with one of these solutions. One of them has to apply and work. Okay. Any other questions? Or any questions?